Chris, Steph, great to have you guys on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Hey. We're excited to be here.
Well, I know you guys have a very unique story, a really, it's a very heartbreaking story as well. And yet I'm so encouraged by seeing the redemption that God is doing both in your lives and through your lives. And so I don't want to waste any time. I want to jump right in. I know every time we have a couple on, we have such rich conversation because we're able to get multiple vantage points as you walk through this, but it also takes a lot of time. So we're going to dive in and I want you guys to be able to share everything about what's going on and encourage our hearts with this. So before we kind of dive into your story, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you guys live, what your family's like, what do you do right now?
Yeah. I feel weird smiling while we're like describing our story as heartbreaking. I'm like, yes, it's so heartbreaking.
Dude, I feel like that all the time. We literally get on every episode and we're like, we're so excited for you to hear this story. Oh, it's really heartbreaking, but it's amazing what God does through it,
Yeah. And it is a blessing having two people because we kind of like split if one of us starts to flounder or,
That's so true. We're each other's safety.
It's a great safety net. But we are south of Nashville in a town called Murfreesboro. We have two kids, Asher and Nora. They are 8 and 7 and almost 9. And we are full-time what we have been called musicianaries, traveling the country. We've always used music as the platform to tell the story of what God did, the miracle that he did in our lives. And
what he can do in everybody's.
Yeah. And obviously, I think your audience is probably well acquainted with this, but God is not the God of one happy ending. We don't travel and tell our story to say, hey, this is what you can have too, right? Yeah. It's just
as far as how our story ended.
Yes. It's that God is the God of all endings and can make all things beautiful when we surrender that to him.
Redeems it all. Yeah.
Yeah, we often say this is the stories that we never wanted to write, and yet God writes even better stories than what we could intend to write. It's like
that's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we dive into that a little bit? Why don't you guys take us back in your journey? Because, we often talk about this idea of journeying from pain to purpose. And that's really, you guys are just a shining example of that in terms of the purposes that are flowing out of you, out of this deep pain that you guys experience. So why don't you take us back to the beginning of the story and just kind of bring us along the journey?
Yeah. As soon as I saw your podcast, I think we followed each other somehow on Instagram or whatever. And I was perusing your page and I was like, man, I don't know who this guy is, but I learned your story and I thought, man, this is so similar to what we do and what we tell, at least in the heart of it, So really happy to be here. And our story, knowing that story is so powerful and how God can use story, in Revelation, it even says that, the enemy is overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony.
Right.
So, we carry our story everywhere we go, and it's still unfolding. But ours starts many years ago for us. We were 16. She was 16. I was 17 when we met. And we're in the process of writing a book right now. So all of this,
we're living in that.
So all of this this early season, like it's really beautiful to go back and remember all of that. Yeah. But we met very early on a mission trip to Philadelphia, of all places.
Like mission field.
Third world country.
It's just the wild jungle of Philadelphia. So we met. Neither of us were looking for love. Stephanie even had a boyfriend at the time, but God just sort of knit our hearts together on this trip. We weren't trying. It wasn't forced. It just happened. And, we did have the hiccup of Stephanie having to break up with her boyfriend when we got back. But anyway,
very serious.
Yeah, it was so serious, right? Yeah. But it wasn't an early obstacle. So we stayed in the same town. We got married. We went to college together. Those I reversed those, but we
Got
went
married halfway through college.
halfway through college.
Yeah. Oh wow. You're brave.
Yes.
Or stupid.
There are other
Brave or
words.
naive. One of the.
I don't know what people were thinking to let us do that, but we I mean, you can jump in, but we categorize this season of our life as looking good on paper, like doing what we were told to do to have a good life, right? Or at least doing what we thought was expected of us, right?
Yeah, super involved in church, worship, volunteer worship leaders. We both had part-time positions at our church. Just, all the right thing, all the things that a good Christian couple does here in the South.
And like a lot of people here in the South, or even just all around the country in the greater body of Christ, we have this checklist, but we didn't have some of those like pillars of spiritual formation happening or really even being taught to us. We weren't in deep communal relationships. We had friends, but we weren't, and it's not I don't want to put this just on the church, but we weren't being cultivated in that way, having genuine, like sharing what's really going on in our life. Because for me, what was really going on was I was walking through this season of really serious and existential doubt about God. And is he there? Is he who I've been taught that he is? Is he even real?
Yeah.
And I can be, deconstruction is this whole thing now. And there's so much like grace and empathy and solidarity around that topic. But I don't know, I don't want to make myself sound special, but that wasn't as big of a conversation. This is kind of, I mean, this is like 12 years ago. Yeah. So,
right.
Or even before that, I mean, this could have been 15 years. So when all of that started happening, so I felt very alone, and, I didn't really want to share either, because it's hard. And and so I just hid, and hiding opened the door to other sin, other brokenness in my life, seeking out something to make, outside of this taught, expressed way of Jesus. I'm looking outside of that, to try and satisfy. So I mentioned we went to college together. I'm in the music industry. Stephanie's going to school for education. She has a master's degree, by the way. She's a smarty pants in education. And
I'm really using that today.
Yeah.
It's okay. I use it on my own children.
There you go.
Absolutely, you do. You use it on me. You need to anyway. And so, I was in the music industry, which is, like a super wholesome place for a struggling, doubting young man. And I fell into parties and drugs and alcohol and just all these caricatures, these stereotypical things that people, fall into. But for me, it was really trying to medicate and mitigate and suppress the shame that I had, and those are big fancy words to just say that I was in a way, I was engaging in this form of idolatry, replacing what can be found in only Jesus through these other things. And no one knew what I was going through. I'm hiding everything, even from Stephanie, my wife, who's supposed to be my best friend, who I can share everything with. She knew some things, but it was very, 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 very little. And that drove a wedge between us. It drove a wedge between me and God, me and the church. I'm leading worship still. We're serving and volunteering in all these different ways. But I got to the point where I didn't even believe, and yet I'm still playing the part in front of everybody. And that's just so much, even the only people who knew the most real, I can't even say that though, because I had a version of me with these friends that I would go out and get drunk and have parties and all that with, and then I had this other crowd that knew this other part of me, but there's no no one knew the whole story.
Yeah.
And the lie that I started to hear was, well, you would be happy if you weren't married anymore, because that was the linchpin, I guess, that I needed to believe was the problem. Not that I'm separated, not that I'm not known fully. It's that I'm being held back in some way. And so I believed that lie, and that led me to a night in January. I could talk forever. Please interrupt me, someone. But that led me to
in 2010.
In 2010, that led me to a night of everything coming to a head. You know, I decided that I didn't want to be married anymore, and that all surfaced in 14 words. Truthfully, that I shared, like it was 14 words out of my mouth. Right before we had dinner with Steph's family, I said, "Hey, can we talk? I don't believe in God anymore, and I don't want to be married anymore."
Wow.
And it wasn't a cry for help. That was really like what I thought was best, not just for me. You know, I had these lies swimming that it was good, somehow that it was good for her too, because we're so different now. And instead of seeking wholeness and unity in that covenant, I just wanted to isolate and separate. So,
wow, man, Steph, I know that. I mean, that had to have. I mean, I can't imagine how that landed on you. You know, and I want to.
We've written songs about it.
Right. I want to put a pin in that for a second and come to what your response was, or what your initial reaction or feelings were in that. But I'm curious first, Chris, if now is looking back on it. What became kind of the catalyst for some of this, as we can term it, deconstructionism for you? You know, which was this some kind of a, as you look back on it, was it some kind of a deep, pain point that you were experiencing, or was it kind of very much what many of us come to head with? You know, I'm reading a book right now called The Critical Journey, where it talks about every one of us in our faith coming to a place where we begin to say, wait, this faith construct that I have learned, it doesn't seem to be holding up in this world that I'm experiencing right now. And so you have to almost come into your own understanding of it, right? And so that's almost everybody's journey. But for you, how would you pinpoint the catalyst that began to unravel some of these, long-standing beliefs that you had, or these practices, or this, faith that you were carrying?
Yeah, obviously thought a lot about it. I don't get asked about it a ton, so it's really fun when I do.
Yeah, people in Christian circles are very scared.
Yeah.
They're like, well, we're so glad you came back to the faith, right? It's like, but don't talk about the questions that you had that might lead other people into having questions.
But the amazing thing is that, there's these spiritual teachers that will say that critical journey, this journey of integration and then disintegration and then reintegration. There's a lot of these words that we use, or wholeness and then deconstruction and reconstruction. That is critical, right? And I think maybe one of the biggest things that led to that for me was not knowing that inspecting and letting some of those things die, or letting some of those ideas that I had, those beliefs and those things that were coming to the surface, letting my faith break apart can be healthy, right? I was talking with a friend about this the other day. Sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'll absolutely answer. I think that it comes down, why are we as the church afraid, or why are we as people afraid of that? And some of it is, I think, that we don't trust the Holy Spirit to work in people's lives through their broken faith, through their like even just lies that they believe that need to burn away, right?
Yeah.
And we want to control, and we're seeing people go down a hard road, not realizing that hard road could even potentially, we want to draw them back to Jesus, right? But those journeys away can lead. Wow. And that for me, I think was probably part of it, because I was very much into science, very much into, still am, just the mysterious, what we don't know about the universe, what we don't. And I didn't have an analog to that in my spiritual journey, right? There wasn't this cultivation of the experience of God, of who God is, of the flow of the Spirit. It was very academic and very belief-based, structure-based, idea-based. And systematic theology. And those are all, they're great, right? But they're dead if they're not paired with the Spirit and this mystical thing that we can't put God into a box like we want to. So I think at the core level, I think that's at least one way I would answer that question.
That's really good. I find so often, just jumping off of that people try to hold those two things mutually exclusive. It's like you've got sound doctrine and really strong constructs of systematic theology, or you are operating in the mysteries and the flow of the Spirit, but you can't merge the two, right?
Yeah,
and the reality is
it's like the East-West thing, right? We're in the West and we forget, or at least aren't even told, like, hey, we're swimming in the ideological waters of even the Enlightenment, and just bringing to the table this whole thought-based, idea-based culture that we don't know we're swimming in those waters, right? So to even wake people up to that mystery or this other way of thinking with it, there's even something else to reconcile with the ideas and the head-heart thing. So
Well, even Jesus said this, right? And again, we're going off on a tangent. I'll come back around here on this, but even Jesus said, true worshipers will worship me in spirit and in truth.
Yes.
He didn't hold those two things mutually exclusive, right? And you have these camps that are debating at that time, like, well, how are we worshiping? We're worshiping on this mountain or this mountain. And it's like, no, we've got to hold those two things together in tension, marrying those two things. I don't know. You guys are probably familiar with Bema podcast. I've been talking about it recently on our podcast quite a bit. Have you heard of this, Bema?
No.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Again, we're going off on a tangent, but it's exactly, Chris, what you were just talking about with the Eastern, Western ideologies.
Cool.
And how we have to understand as Western civilization, right? We have to understand that we impose that Western ideal, the Western ideals, Hellenistic ideals into our faith when everything in Scripture is written for and written in the context of an Eastern audience. So we miss so much of it. So Bema kind of helps to unpack some of that stuff, but you'll appreciate this.
That's awesome.
As a musician, he comes out of the gate, Marty Solomon does, talking about a piano. If you were to play just with your, as musicians, you guys will love this. If you just play with your left hand, you're playing the bass notes, right? And you honestly can't make out, if you just played those bass notes, you probably wouldn't, unless you're very intuitive musically, make out what song you're playing. Right. Well, then your right hand's playing most of the melody, and you can make that out, but it lacks a lot of substance. It's not full. But so it's like that's the Western and Eastern trying to play those separately. But if you play them together, it brings this full, rich experience of who God is.
Nobody wants to hear the Charlie Brown theme one hand at a time, right?
That's right.
It's two different songs.
That's so true. And I just kind of wish that the church would allow space for us to wrestle with those things. And I'm sure you do too, Chris, because it might have changed your journey a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it would have. And that's not some of that again is just, I don't want to blame the church specifically. There is, or at least put all the blame on the church. Right. But that's also one of those things where it's like, hey, that was something that just took a little longer to break apart in my life. The Holy Spirit still worked, and now he doesn't always. Some people never quite get to that reconstruction phase, which is so sad. But to know that and to see maybe in me, if he can bring back and save, and if a guy like me can reintegrate and find a way back to Jesus, maybe other people can too.
Wow. Okay, Steph. So this news lands on you. These 14 words.
Yeah.
He speaks them to you. Talk to me about how did that make you feel? Like, where were you on your journey, and where did that intersect with you all of a sudden?
It was like a nice cup of hot cocoa, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I literally, and people use that word literally all the time. Like, I literally could not speak because I couldn't process what was happening. Because I'm very logical. I'm Enneagram 1, like very black and white, had my life planned out. That's where I found so much security. And so for him to say that, it's like I couldn't function, because this life that I thought I knew just in 5 seconds was ripped out from under me. And so, I mean, I even talking about it, like, I don't even know what I said. I know at some point I ended up like in our bedroom, just in bed, because I couldn't process, you know.
Or you were processing, your brain was trying to, I remember following you like around the house, like just say something, like say something, but you couldn't speak.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I had seen little things, right? Like in hindsight, it's always 2020, but I knew that we weren't in the best place. I knew that we had been having communication issues and noticing little things where he, you know, wasn't praying, or he wouldn't want to be a part of some of the events and things at church or leading worship or things. But I attributed it to, we are in a really busy season. You know, we got married in college. Then I went right to graduate school. We were working school, all of that. So I just assumed, okay. And we just bought a house like not that long before. So got dogs, all the things. So right. I just figured, okay, let's just get through this busy season, get settled. It'll get better. And so I kind of, I think in self-protection, chose to remain naively optimistic about what was going on. And so, it was like a bomb going off that I did not anticipate at all. And so, you know, from there, I fought for our marriage for a while. We still lived in the house together for about a month. And didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter what I did. I couldn't convince him to stay.
Yeah, we've said a lot that I was like an iron fist with a velvet glove. You know, I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I was very nice, very cordial. I truly did not want to hurt her, but it also, at a point, like nothing could stop me. Everybody was meeting with me, trying to change my mind, figure out what's going on, but it didn't matter. I'm doing this, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think in that about month or so of trying to make something work, you know, it was terrifying for me to hear his lack of faith, and like we would have some conversations about, you know, he was telling me about reasons why he couldn't like believe some of the things in the Bible, and I was not equipped to, not that I could have said anything that would change his mind at that point anyway. But I mean, that was terrifying for me and my very boxed in faith and my belief in the Bible and what I had been raised in. Because at that point I'm like 23, you know, and still figuring out who I am.
Not a theological apologist.
No. No. So, so after, you know, a month or so, I ended up moving in with my parents, and a month or so later he had filed for divorce.
Well, it's really difficult in marriage in general when you have two people who are, you know, oftentimes opposites, very complementary. Depends on how you want to frame it, right? They're just very different, but there's a reason the Lord kind of put you together. It's very difficult to hold space for each other for your struggles in general. But when you found yourself almost at complete odds in terms of your faith journey and all the, you know, all the presuppositions that come along with that, right? Like you're building your entire life around this is what we believe, and this is how we operate, and this is how we fit into culture, and this is how we, you know, this is our worldview. You know, I have to imagine, Stephanie, that just really threw everything for you. It caused your head to be spinning. You're, you know, just going, what do I do?
What do I do? Talked about shame, you know, like.
Yeah, and I had told him through that season, I was like, I'm willing to figure this out. You know, I think I believed that he would come back to the faith at some point. I didn't know how long that journey would be. You know, if we were to stay together, that we could figure it out. You know, it's like how, I know you raised the question, well, what do we do with our kids when we have kids someday? I don't know. I don't know, but I believed in the covenant that we had, and I couldn't convince him of that.
Was it difficult, Stephanie, to not personalize some of this?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me about that a little bit.
Man, I think my default, I have grown a lot. Suffering does that to you.
Yeah. Come on.
But there are things that I brought into our marriage that I didn't even realize were kind of toxic. Everybody could see what he was doing, right? Like the sin and his choice to leave and all of that. But I was able to see through that process, and after, we had separated, that I had a lot of pride, a lot of self-righteousness, a lot of judgment that I brought in. And so for him to leave, I did, like you said, I experienced a lot of shame and felt foolish because, again, Enneagram 1, like, you do the right thing. Like, if you do the right thing, the right outcome should happen. Yep. Like that was this ridiculous construct that I had of the world.
You were in Proverbs. You hadn't gotten to Ecclesiastes.
From somebody who grew up in a beautiful, godly nuclear family, I had not had to face things like that before. And so I was an achiever, and, you do the right things. That's what you do. And so, I think at first it was really easy for me to play the victim and assume, like, I didn't cause this. I didn't choose this, which is true. I didn't choose the divorce. I never would have chosen that. But God very graciously showed me that I wasn't faultless. I'm not righteous without him. I never will be. So it was a season of growth, and I could talk forever about the year that I went through that year, but I would never want to do it again. But like you said early on, like I wouldn't trade it for anything because of who I am now, who I know God to be now. So much richer and fuller of a relationship I have with him because of what I walk through.
I can relate with that in some ways, Stephanie. I'm an Enneagram 3, but I'm a self-preservation 3, which I'm learning mirrors a lot like a 1 in terms of your ideology. You just believe if I do the right thing, then the right things will follow, right? The success will follow. I just have to do the right things. I have to be right and true and stay to the plumb line. And so it can often cause me to not hold space for people who are either questioning things or not doing the right thing, or, because I'm like, no, you gotta, like, here's the, like, right here, stay within the guardrails and everything's gonna be fine, right? Yeah. And then we go through things in life that just blow that whole construct up, right? It's like, well, that's not true. Yeah. So where does that leave me? You guys both, now you're at this place where, you were in this point of your story, you're separated now. Where did God show up? Talk to me about that for each of you.
Yeah. Steph's kind of led beautifully to that point, how God, kind of brought her, showed her the mirror, held up that mirror to say, hey, I had some more crashing to do. And all the floors that I fell through as I crashed, it was just more, it's just a bunch of lies, and I think that walking through a season like I walked through, it could be easy for me to pin it all on just, it was doubt, it was faith. But there was a lot of other things at play too. There were those idols that I mentioned earlier where I'm chasing that, thinking that is what will make me happy. Naively even thinking that happiness and joy is like something that I can capture and hold on to, right? Yeah. Not that, or that I can even find it in a pursuit, that it's in a thing, that it's in weed or alcohol or friends or freedom. Freedom unfettered is not free. And that's what I found out because I'm with girls now that I can be myself. I wanted to be myself. I didn't want to feel like I was being held back or held accountable, and I believed this lie that I would find that in freedom. But freedom unfettered to do whatever we want to do. I think it was John Mark Comer. He said something to the effect of, there's nothing more miserable than a heart that thinks it's only happy when it gets what it wants. Wow. And that is me to a T, is following these idols. And those idols had to break, had to fall away for me to get to a place where I was broken and desperate enough to even need God, because those lies had to fall away. And, they did. I was in, relationships, and one of them went really, 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 really poorly. And it caused, when it ended, it kind of it blew apart. Everything was heading to the edge of this cliff, right? And all this baggage coming with me, all these kind of this house of cards getting taller and taller. And this was just the thing that started that collapse. And when it did collapse, everything kind of fell around me, because I had devoted and made decisions to change and shape my entire life around these lies that I was believing. And so when they crumbled, everything in my life sort of imploded. And I was waking up in cold sweats, battling anxiety, which was something I'd never dealt with. There was some physical pain that I was battling in my body. I was in very, very, very rough shape, because I was all alone.
Yeah.
I'd been driven so far to isolation. All I had was a mom who was just there to love me, right, and stand beside me. But everybody else I'd pushed away. And, falling flat on your face and having everything crumble around you has a way of helping you see things a little more clearly than you could when things were clouded, And in that brokenness, in that sort of just complete desperation, I encountered the experience that I needed from God, because I had all of these intellectual doubts, all of those things that we've talked about, this east-west. I was locked into that west thing, thinking that that's who God was. And he needed to meet me on a heart level. So I say all the time, God didn't find me through my head. He pursued my heart.
Wow.
And coming in contact with that love, that experience of transformational love, when we experience radical love in our most broken place.
Wow.
You can't leave that unchanged. And thankfully, I didn't push God away, and I hadn't just said, no, there's no way we can ever know that there's a God. I may have said that, but the door was always open. So in this desperate, broken, tender place, my heart had broken open and God moved in. And man, everything changed very quickly for me. Everything kind of fell apart really quickly. And our story happened very quickly. Stephanie makes fun of me all the time. If I do something, it's going to be hard and fast and hot and heavy, right? So things fell apart quickly, and for me at least, they did sort of rematerialize quickly. I was I'll shut up there for a second.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, it's very it's interesting to me that you were pushing back so much cerebrally. So it was your head that was really pushing back from faith, or at least coming up with all these reasons why it can't be possible or God can't be real. And it was your heart that God had to really grab hold of. And I think that even anybody who's listening to this or watching this right now, they're probably thinking of somebody who it's like, man, I'm trying to get them to understand, or they have these questions that, it's like, what if you just trusted the Holy Spirit to do his thing, the thing that only he can do, that you can't, and you hold enough space to allow that person to see the Holy Spirit through you,
I think the best gift you could give somebody is of course, it's trying to lead them to Jesus, number one, but it's the argument is, how do we best do that? And if you were to ask me right now, I would say the best gift that you can give someone in that situation is just yourself. That you aren't going to leave them, that you're with them, you want to walk with them through this journey. And
just to be a safe place for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
my encouragement to anyone in that season is to not stop, right? To not just, okay, this faith doesn't work for me. Okay, I'm done, right? Just don't be done.
Yeah.
Because if you keep seeking, leaving room for whatever spirituality, whatever mysticism or religiosity, if you leave space for that in your life, I think God is going to continue to work. And I think that Jesus is the best and the most compelling spiritual teacher, rabbi, whatever that's ever lived. And I think that it's hard and it doesn't always work because we're human and we're broken, but
right.
encouraging people to keep seeking.
That's so good. That's so good. Stephanie, talk to me about your, what was it? About a year is what you said? It's about a year that you guys were separated?
Yeah, a little less. So
a little less. Okay.
Yeah. So after I had moved out, and trying to navigate all of the stages of grief or trauma, or, however you want to name it, that the anger, the shame, the just feeling foolish, all the things. I'm thankful for whatever reason that did push me towards God and not away, because I feel like people either go one way or the other. But I went to a women's retreat that I didn't realize the theme was about finding joy in your suffering. And I feel like I walked out of that equipped with so many scriptures that I read every day, that just got in my brain and in my heart that God wasn't going to waste that season. That he hadn't forgotten about me. He saw me. He was with me walking through that, and he wasn't going to waste it. No matter what my ending was, whether my ending had him in it or not, it was not going to be wasted. And so, as I'm kind of figuring out how to move forward as somebody who, not only am I grieving my husband, I'm grieving my best friend. I've known him since I was 16. Nobody knew me like he did. And grieving this life that I had dreamed of. Our kids, all these conversations of, what are our kids going to be like? What are they going to like? All of that's just gone. And so it took me in a moment. Yeah. So it took me a long time, obviously. But I think as much as I had said, like, okay, God, like my life is yours. I want you to take this pain. We have a song called Take This, but take this pain away. I'm ready to move on. For so long, I was still clinging to it, still trying to grasp at some way to control the situation. And it wasn't until I was able to fully let it go that I felt peace. I think for the first time walking through it, I saw hope for my future and what it could be. And so again, I could, talk so long about the ways that.
Well, all the different ways.
I mean, even just understanding where my identity is from changed in that season. Again, I was really good at being the good girl, the good Christian girl, achiever, doing well in everything that I do.
Proverbs.
I thought that was really insightful, Chris. You were at Proverbs, you just hadn't experienced Ecclesiastes yet,
Yeah.
I didn't come up with it, but
that's an equation, right? Wow. So moving away from finding my identity in what I did and how my perception from other people of who I was in the world, moving to, because forced to move that because, that was stripped away, and just finding out my identity being just in being a daughter of the King. And that was enough. I didn't have to strive for that. I didn't have to do all of these things, get the checklist checked off to be that. That's all that I need.
Wow.
And so,
easy yoke.
Yeah. Wow. So that was a huge thing. I have a tattoo on my foot from that season about that. So walking through that, getting to a place where I felt like, okay, like God, I can trust you with this mess. I can trust you with the beauty that I believe and know that you are going to bring out of it, whatever that looks like. And so I was starting to go through a divorce care class. I had bought a new house, and that's when I heard from this guy again. Several months after the divorce.
You heard from your parents, who'd heard from my mom, who had passed it through the grapevine that something was going on. And so I called. So to back up a little bit, it's so beautiful how different we are, how complimentary we are.
We didn't know that till the second time around.
We really complement each other. Let me just put it that way. We're very different.
Very different puzzle pieces. Very different.
Yeah. But there's two characters in the story of the prodigal son, and both of them needed to be broken.
Yeah.
And God broke us in such different, but also spiritually such similar ways, because when everything happened to Stephanie, she had nothing. I'm so grateful that her suffering and that the loss did push her to the feet of Jesus, right? But she was desperate. She had nothing else. Where else can I go, Lord, right? I was broken and brought to my knees. Where else can I go? I'm alone. I'm broken. I'm isolated, so far from home. God found me there in that place. I experienced his love. And I just started opening the word. I started telling the truth. We have this idea, again, I'll bring up John Mark Comer. He says a lot of times what we do is we feel our feelings, we have them in our minds, and then we kind of sanitize all of that, and then we bring God what's left. We bring God the right answers. We bring God the right attitudes that we're supposed to have. But in Psalms, we have this beautiful picture of anger and depression and indictment.
Indictment even,
Yeah, and deep doubt and questioning. And so I just started doing that, being okay with where I was at, and pouring out to God and receiving back. As I pour out, he pours in. I'm opening the word with an open heart instead of a critical eye. Things are just leaping off the page. It's this beautiful season of
people are reaching back out to you, like
old
so many
friends,
things,
coming back into the fray. This communal aspect is sort of happening, and I made this list in my phone of all the ways that God showed up that I just couldn't explain or make sense of.
Yeah.
Because I knew that someday that headpiece would come kick back in. And this was an experience that was happening to me that I wanted to document. And so somewhere in that season, I started to hear this whisper, and I ignored it at first because she didn't tell you this. You asked her earlier how that made her feel. I told her one time that even if I were to believe again, that we still didn't make sense, and how crushing that is for a woman. It's like, oh, well, I'm still not good enough. Great. Okay.
Wow.
So that's where my heart was, like, we still just don't make sense, even if I believed again someday. But I started hearing this whisper that turned into it wasn't an audible voice, but it basically became like a shout to me. And I'd never heard any message as strongly, and probably even to this day. I felt like God was telling me to pursue her again. And so I reached out to her parents, and they confessed, and we're in the South. So that makes sense, I guess, in the South.
Well, you were a son to them.
And I was like a son to them. And it felt like a good boundary, it felt respectful. And so they called her, and I ended up at her house, and she wouldn't let me in. And she knew I was coming. She knew I was coming. But we walked the neighborhood and just shared stories of what God had done. It was this really sweet evening, of sharing, and I'll let you talk about that night.
Well, and at the end of this 2-hour conversation, he told me that God had told him that we should be together again, just
very respectful,
first conversation several months after being divorced, and he was somehow expecting me to be like, I don't know what I expected. God can still redeem our stories with brokenness. I was such a fool, but trying to do the right thing, just a little what do they call it? Gung ho.
Yeah, a little ambitious about
Trigger
it.
happy.
Yeah.
And as beautiful as that night was, as much as I saw the answer to hundreds, if not thousands, of prayers that have been prayed on his behalf, on our behalf, trust takes time, and it should. Yeah. So we tell everybody, if somebody wants to earn your trust back, they'll take the time to prove that to them. So, and you agreed to. You might have been a little
I wanted
disappointed.
to, yeah.
But Yeah, you agreed with that. But so we ended up intentionally taking a few months just to do counseling. I think you had already started it anyway, separately, to involve our community or pastors to be praying. And long story short, at the end of that season, everybody was, and with our counselor together, was in agreement that if we wanted to pursue reconciliation, that we should go for it. And we believe in a God of relationship, a God of redemption, a God that says nothing is too far gone to be redeemed. And so we went on our second first date after that. Wow. And then we're remarried in a tiny ceremony.
We waited again. We waited.
We do. Even that.
That's awesome.
And so it was a little over a year from the point when my life exploded to remarriage.
Wow. And just real quick, it's easy for us to like look back in hindsight. We really were. We made so many mistakes the first time, and we were trying to be wise and correct some of those mistakes by involving community and by, healing ourselves, because the best gift that God gave us in that time was himself. It wasn't each other, Yeah. If he had only redeemed us, that would have been enough.
Yeah.
Right. But we got this added gift, and it's easy for me to look back and us to, for listeners to hear like, oh my gosh, look at how wise they are. I want everyone to know, like, here in my foolishness of after 2 hours telling her, hey, God wants us to be together again. We were still broken walking through this process, and God can still use that if we just stay faithful to him and trust the season that he has us in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like to me there's like humility was a big part of this whole thing. Just being, humble before each other, humble before God, and going, like you said, Chris, you're not gonna do it exactly right. You're not gonna dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Even the second time around, even learning from your mistakes, there's gonna be brokenness involved in the whole process. There's brokenness involved in the redemption process. But I think the linchpin that the distinct characterizing difference is humility, where we're like, hey, I acknowledge that there's brokenness here, and Lord, I want you to fill that space and bring wholeness into these places. Steph, we have so many people who listen to this, and for them, their story or their experience, and I just know this from our forums and our community platform, people who are engaging in stuff, as well as like coaching that has done so many. Women and wives have experienced some kind of sexual betrayal. This had to feel like some kind of a betrayal as well for you. And it can be very difficult in those situations for trust to be rebuilt. And I love that you've already highlighted, hey, let's take some time, and that Chris was willing to go through the time that for trust to be built. But can you talk about the inward battle for you? Like, I'm sure it wasn't like this just real linear process for you where it's like, oh, every day there's just a little bit more trust and a little bit more trust, and how clean and neat and pretty. Like, talk about that like battle, because I'm sure that there was something going on there with you going like waking up some mornings going, okay, I think that this is going to be healed and that it is healed. And then other days where it's like, well, I don't know about this, Oh,
that's good.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, having somebody else, a counselor, a therapist, a pastor, walking you through that process is key because
hopefully who has experience.
Yes. Somebody who is, rooted in the Bible, who can walk you through this, because we could not have done it on our own. I don't think in a healthy way. We very much couldn't have done it without the Lord, first and foremost. Like there's we didn't have kids to tie us together. Like this would not have happened without him. But having other people to speak into it was so helpful, because one of the best tools that we had in rebuilding that trust was just a simple thing that our counselor told us. He said, set a time period. I think for us it was like 3 months or something. And he said, in those 3 months, nothing is off limits. So I could ask him anything and everything that I wanted to know. And you have to be, we actually talked to somebody about this just yesterday, I think, but you have to be, as the person who was betrayed, you have to think through, okay, how much do I want to know? Are there certain things, if I know, it'll be hurtful, or is it more helpful to know? So, I'm somebody, I would rather know all the things that happened so that I don't feel I don't know, blindsided if something came up later. So I was able to ask him everything. And same for him. You know, there are things that obviously that I brought into our marriage that was not healthy and that caused some issues. So I would say it goes both ways. But at the end of those 3 months, you kind of put it to bed. Right. Yeah. And you can't, obviously, triggers happen and things come up. But I think there was so much safety in that boundary of knowing at the end of that season, you know what, I've got all that I need to know. We've put that to rest. Like, let's look to the future. He can know I'm not going to bring this stuff back up and weaponize it at him. You know,
things will come up. But.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was really helpful. Being in community with other people, with other women was huge. I didn't have...
Even before our reconciliation.
Yeah, I didn't have relationships with many, especially no deep relationships with other women. Yeah. And so that was something that I did not know. It sounds so silly, but like I didn't know the value of that. Yeah. And so that was huge for me as well, just having support. And again, trust is such a hard thing because it's not measured. You know, there is no metric for it. So it really just took time. It took intentionality in our relationship with each other. You know, we do a lot with family life, and their whole thing is you're either moving towards isolation or oneness. Like there's no stagnant place. So intentionally moving towards that oneness, all of that, you know, it all comes together to rebuild that trust.
Yeah. Wow. You know, I'm really curious about this personally because I grew up in the South. And now I'm in the Midwest. And so there's just distinct cultural differences between those two things. And you know, and those become even more magnified in church world. Like you see those cultural distinctions in church world. And I have been and am still in church leadership. And so I think those two things, growing up in the South and being in church leadership, has caused me to not truly understand what being in deep community is. So that's just a confession right here. And this is a journey I'm on right now. You guys are continually saying, I mean, you've said this a few times in this conversation and how imperative it is in the healing process, restoration process, redemption process, just in life journeys in general, right? It's this deep, rich, authentic, transparent community. We can throw around a lot of those kinds of buzzwords because you go to every church conference, they're going to talk about it. You go to every, in circles, they're going to talk about that. What does that mean? Can you kind of give us shed some light on that for you guys as you've walked through this experience? I'm sure you understand what good community is and what it's not.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I will say first, I can tell you what it's not, what we thought it was before, because we were constantly surrounded by people. We were constantly involved in volunteers and we knew a lot of people. I mean, our wedding, our first wedding, we had like over 200 people and we couldn't whittle it down because we just knew so many people were so involved. But nobody truly knew what was going on.
And so as you were talking, I was thinking, what is good community? And I think so for us, we tell our story like every chance that we get, everywhere that we go. And you would not believe, I'm sure you know more than most how much your vulnerability, your transparency is a magnet for other people. Because the reason that feels good might not be the right thing, but the reason it feels kind of sacred or almost beautiful to see someone else share like us, when we're sharing what really is going on, what really happened, when you hear that on a podcast, when you see that on TV or whatever, that's a taste of what real community is. Real community is being fully known. And when you see someone else like us tell a story of brokenness, of real brokenness, it creates this thing in you where you don't feel so alone anymore in your brokenness. Yeah. And so don't let it end there, I guess, is my encouragement, because that is why it's so attractive, why we do feel such a pull for real stories, because our heart is called to know, to love, to extend grace, and to be given grace, to be known, to be loved. And that is the body of Christ. That is this mysterious, mystical God. He is relationship. It is relationship, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, in this communal thing that we are invited into with them in the flow of the Spirit and with each other in unity and love.
Yeah, and I think practically, we are a part of a church that very much values that. And so, the vast majority of our members are in small groups, more so than I think the average of any other church that we've ever known.
Yeah, it's like a part of the process.
And even our pastors from stage share about their brokenness, their struggles with anger, their struggles with, that. So it starts there in our church. And so we have this model of when we just started a new community group this past year, and
with fear.
Yeah, we'd been in the same one for like 12 years. So we were all brand new together, this new group, as our church is growing. And it is a place where, there's 6 of us couples that we can come together, that we can not always agree on everything, that we can challenge each other, that we can share our brokenness and genuinely, pray for each other in what we're walking through. And it's not pretty, and it's hard, and it's heavy sometimes, but that is where the true life happens. And that's where we can walk away from a gathering and just feel full. It's like I think it's a taste of heaven, when we're all together and vulnerable. Yeah.
Man. Wow. So many questions are coming to my mind. Okay. I don't care. I don't even care about the time. I'm going to ask some of these questions. Okay.
Come on.
What I want to get to in a second, I want to get to kind of how this is the outflowing of this now and what you guys are doing as far as the music that you're writing and the things that you're releasing. But as we're walking with people, there are things that they're sharing with us behind closed doors that nobody talks about on public forums, right? And yet people are experiencing. And so those are the questions I usually want to ask, because I can remain anonymous for them, right? It's like, hey, here's what I know people are asking right now.
Yeah.
And this might be too vulnerable for you to share, but Stephanie, have you experienced any criticism for quote unquote taking Chris back? Or I feel like I hear that so often, almost, and it feels like a very spiritual thing sometimes, where it's like the enemy doesn't want redemption and reconciliation to happen. And so he's going to keep creeping into all it with different people in your life that are like, you shouldn't, or you know.
And we've heard that from people who reach out to us as well, I think, because people with outside of the situation can definitely have opinions and think they know better. I think I was very spoiled in the community that I was in at the time with my family. And I think people that knew Chris personally were still praying for that reconciliation. Even seeing what he was doing, I think most people in our circle, because at that time we had just previously joined the church that we're in now, so we did have that little taste of that true community right before he left. But I think you had already kind of made up your mind before we even got to that church. But so I didn't get a ton of criticism from the people that I think mattered the most to me. Yeah.
That's a good distinction, by the way. That's a very good distinction.
Yeah, but I know. I still remember the feeling of when I first heard it. When I actually, while we were apart, I started attending a young adult group at another church, because I needed to go somewhere where people didn't know, didn't know what I was walking through, so I could just go and like worship and, meet new people. And so that group of people, when the young adult pastor there learned of him coming back, because they had heard my story at that point, they were very skeptical.
Because that's all they knew.
They only knew me. Right, they knew what I had walked through. They knew what he had done, Yeah. And so I immediately I felt my pride swell up, and because I felt like that was a judgment of my character, and that's like the worst thing you can do to an Enneagram 1.
They were trying to protect you.
They were trying to protect me, but that's hard. That's really hard, especially for people who are, people pleasers, or, you really care about people's opinion. And that's where, man, you just have to be so tuned in to what the Spirit is telling you, because ultimately He is who is guiding you and who knows what's best for you. And yes, please please hear the wisdom of the people around you, if that's you, because there is wisdom in people outside of your situation. But I would definitely reconcile that with other things that you're hearing, with what you're seeing in front of you.
What she's saying is that if you're hearing criticism, don't just immediately dismiss it. If those people know you and they know your situation, like it could be wisdom. So just take that to the Lord and process that in community. Ask them questions, you know?
Wow. Yeah, because you're still going to have blind spots. You know, everybody has blind spots.
But God's heart is for redemption. God's heart is for reconciliation.
If at all possible,
in any sort of relational setting, if it's between two believers, right? Now it's very different with a marriage, but that's true of God's heart. But, you know, there's wisdom in his people. You know, he gives us that community for a reason.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, he's for reconciliation because even more to the heart, he's for the wholeness of his people. And so if, you know, what looks like reconciliation on the surface to the world would actually lead to a more disintegration of his people, it's not truly reconciliation. And so that's where wisdom has to creep in. And that's where this is so nuanced. It can't be completely black and white.
Yeah.
And it's why there are going to be people in your life who only have a certain sliver of vantage point that are going to, you know, try to interject their opinions on things. And it's going to be so. Again, to prop up what you guys are saying about walking with consistent, godly, safe community who know as much of you, as much of the picture as can be possible, and are able to filter that through the lens of Scripture and the Holy Spirit's movement there. That's going to be the most important thing for us. It provides a safety. There's a shelter there for us.
And even more than that, spending time with, sounds so crazy, but, you know, spending time with this experiential God, this relational God that we're talking about, you know, in silence and solitude and contemplation, and giving him room to speak into those places that we might think we know the right answers.
Yeah.
But with processing and asking good questions, you know, different things can come to the surface. So.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, you know, I mean, I'm sure this is kind of in some ways fast forwarding a little bit because there's still so much of your journey that is woven into all of this. But now you guys are taking your gifts, which is funny because this is all part of kind of both the critical journey. And we talk a lot about J. Robert Clinton's book, The Making of a Leader, and how God will use your gifts and your talents and kind of the building blocks of those things. And then as you go through the dark night of the soul, he infuses those things. They come to convergence. To be used for a greater purpose, a very redemptive purpose.
Wow.
And that's what you guys are doing right now. And of course, it's not, you know, void of of imperfections and brokenness throughout the whole process. That's the beautiful thing about it. But tell me a little bit about this, what you're doing, kind of how the message you're bringing forward because of this redemption you've experienced.
Yeah, well, to tell, I'll let Steph jump in, but to tell the quick story of how we even ended up doing this.
Yeah, this is the last thing I ever thought I'd ever do.
Steph, I think you would get along really well with my wife, Christy, because she says the exact same thing. She's like, I did not want to marry a pastor. I did not want to be on any kind of public platform. I did not want to. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. What was I saying?
Oh, how we even
started
doing this.
So I was in the music industry. I've always been the songwriter. I kind of did it, wanted to do it, but was, you know, not very diligent or disciplined about it. And as we were coming back around, things were happening with us. We were remarried at this point. We knew that there was something special with our story. We just knew, you know, that there's power here. We don't know what that means or what to do with it, but we knew like this is crazy. We knew that. And so we went to this worship conference, and the worship conference had a songwriting track, a songwriting competition.
Performance.
And Stephanie's mom, who's always been our biggest fan, was like, do it. Even it doesn't matter. Just go do it. So we did it. And we just kept making it a little bit further. Looking back now, it was truly terrible. We were the cream of the crap. But
anyway, it was set up like almost like an American Idol.
Yeah,
thing,
it felt like American Idol. And they were like, don't say, this is like backstage, like, don't say anything, just you have less than 30 seconds. Just say your name.
5 seconds.
Yeah, say your name and go. And we were like, no, we're not doing that. So we just told our story very, very, very quickly. And then
before we started singing.
And then we sang a song that, is like a Brooke Fraser Aqualung song. Who Are We Fooling? Which kind of, made sense with our story. And afterward, this girl came up to Stephanie and was just bawling. I'm right where you were. I'm broken, lost, hurting, and seeing the power immediately, like this one-to-one, we tell our story and immediately there's this response and feedback and confirmation and affirmation and encouragement from the Spirit. So we just kept following those breadcrumbs. We started trying to write songs together and it miraculously worked. We didn't even think that our voices sounded good or even like
before
worked, just like our personalities. Like we were like, we don't know what to do. How do we even really lead worship together? She has this sweet voice. I have anyway, but it just worked. It just worked.
Just another thing that God redeemed.
Yeah.
We never would have imagined. Yeah.
And so, one thing led to another. We just kept being honest and writing down our experiences, our prayers, our hopes for people who would walk through something like that. Kept pouring that onto the page in lyric and song and continued telling our story. And man, to see God's work in all of that and how he can just use our brokenness over and over and over again to reveal to people his ability to work in their brokenness and in their broken season. Man, it's favorite thing I've ever done.
So now, our band name, Out of the Dust, comes from our story of what the life that God breathed into the dirt, into the dust of what was left, our marriage that was dead and the life and beauty that he brought out. Like that's who we are as a band and our band name. And so, we write music, yes, from our story, but also music that our prayers, anybody can find themselves in their, like you said, in their brokenness, in their struggles. We don't shy away from writing about the hard things. I think sometimes Christian music can feel a little sanitized. And so, we don't ever want to be that way. And so, we always pray that people will find the brokenness, but also the hope in our songs.
Yeah. And I mean, this is just kind of our banner, but, and it can sound, I know people say things like this, but in context of a story like ours, I think it hits a little harder. Our name is Out of the Dust, and in Genesis, God takes dirt and there's it's almost like this imagery of a clay figurine. Like that's kind of the what I've heard is translated when he makes Adam, he forms Adam, breathes into his nostrils, breathes his spirit. That's that word pneuma, which is spirit. He breathes his spirit. We as humans see dirt. We see brokenness. We see a season that doesn't make sense. We have questions and don't understand how God can work or move in the season that we're in, or even we're doing pretty good, but there's this part of my life, or there's this thing that I don't know what God can do with this. He breathes his spirit into the things that we see as broken. And when we trust him with it, he brings something beautiful out of it. And that's the banner, the flag, the bell that we ring over and over again, is that just like, just like with me not having this head-heart reconciliation, recognizing that suffering is a part of life, but that God is big enough, good enough to use it. And we can have faith. That's our job. Our job is to have faith and trust that he can work and move. And that brings such hope to and freedom to just say, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know. All I see is dirt, God, but I know and trust that you can breathe into these dark places and make something beautiful.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, if you're listening to this on one of your podcast platforms, we're about to play a clip of one of your songs, guys, Make Us Whole, because it actually has the lyrics, Nothing is Wasted, embedded into it, which chorus. Is amazing. It's amazing. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to show a little bit of the actual music video right here. So go ahead and take a listen to this.
what you brought us through. Whoa, through every question, every doubt, you're not shaken, you surround. We will not forget what you brought us through. Walking through fire, you are faithful. Through every trial, we are grateful. Nothing is wasted, this is our hope. You use brokenness to make us whole. You make us whole. We are tested, we are tried, but there's a blessing on the other side. You redeem all the past suffering. Whoa, take our story, take control. Let our lives be a sign of hope that you redeem all of our suffering. Walking through fire, you are faithful. Through every trial, we are grateful. Nothing is wasted, this is our hope. You use brokenness to make us whole. You make us Broken dawn brings the day. Broken ground gives us grain. Broken chains set us free. Beauty comes from broken things. Walking through fire, through every trial. Walking through fire, you are faithful. Through every trial, we are grateful. Nothing is wasted, this is our hope. You use brokenness to make us whole. You make us whole. You make us whole.
Man, that's beautiful, guys. It's awesome. And this, I mean, this, your story and then just your spirit, which you're bringing that story to the world is just remarkable. I mean, I'm blown away. You said it, Chris. You said your story that you knew immediately there was some power behind it. One, it's very powerful because just pragmatically, you don't typically see people separate and come back together. And what a beautiful thing to show off the heart of God, the heart of reconciliation, right? That two people can have such, different broken journeys and they can come back and go, you know what? The Lord is what brings us together and he's going to heal us and mend us and make us whole. But then even from there, it's powerful because of the way God has equipped you guys to now carry this forward and to breathe hope into people's life through your your songwriting and through your music. And I mean, I would affirm that. It's amazing how many times when you just start to get vulnerable with your story. I mean, you guys experienced this in the song competition, how you just become a magnet for people who are experiencing the same thing. And you realize, wait, God's going to use this. He's going to leverage this. And this may not be the platform or the microphone, so to speak, that I wanted, but let's just see what God does with it and see how he uses my brokenness to bless other people. So, if someone is in that situation right now, this girl comes up to you after, just as kind of a close to this, how would you encourage them? Steph, maybe you start. I'm sure you've talked to so many women who have been in similar situations as you. There's someone who's listening to it right now and they're feeling the same way. They're like, I'm right there. If you're having coffee with her, what would you say? Chris, if you're having coffee with someone who is that's walking through the same thing you did, what would you guys say?
Yeah, and we hear from them literally every day. And please, if that's you and we can be an encouragement to you, don't hesitate to find us.
Find us.
I think the first thing that I typically say is that you are not alone. You are not alone in this journey, and you shouldn't be alone in this journey. God sees you. He hears you. He is for you. And he will carry you through this. Whatever that journey looks like, he will carry you. He will give you, our church says this all the time, it's like our mantra, but he will give you what you need to do what he's called you to do. And if he has called you to wait, he will help you wait well. If he has called you to lay it down, he will give you what you need to lay it down and to move forward. And so that, first and foremost, that is the most important, just to lean into him, to know that, he has a journey for you. If you are like me and you felt like the victim and everything's happening to you, God can use that season to refine you. And that's an important part of the process to become, this is more like a very worldly thing to say, but like be the best version of yourself. But that's so true, even just in God being able to refine what's going on in your own heart. So I start there.
Well, you made me think of something just that I think it was John Ortberg says that we, in the presence of God, we are closest to the truest version of ourselves. So bring it. Like, I would encourage someone who's in that, like that brokenness, that betrayed. Again, we don't catch as many like guys, or we do certainly catch people who are on my side of things. And maybe they're wanting reconciliation, but the brokenness is just too deep and they're still unknown. There's this, is it even possible? I was in that season with her where I didn't know. I had this firm belief that God had told me this, so if you're in any season like that, just the freedom, or at least just to hear that it's hard. Yeah. We really don't like being in pain. Yeah. We really don't like suffering. And that's true. That is okay. But it is also okay to bring our full selves and say, God, I hate this. Yeah. And bring our full selves, giving yourself the grace and space to feel and process all of the hurt, all of the grief. Like we don't do that well in our culture. Right. We don't lament well, but 2/3 of the Psalms are laments, right? Not knowing, not understanding. So there is something beautiful and deep that comes out of a lament and out of processing grief. So not being too quick to resist that suffering, resist that hurt, but trusting, like I said before, that God, and having faith and trust that God will use that season and use all of it. You don't understand, you don't know, and we don't, but we have a song called The After, and it just came out. And I think I saw this quote somewhere, and I kind of lifted it a little bit, but it was essentially that, when we're in the valley, the fog makes it so that we can't see. But one day we will get to a mountaintop again where we can look back over that valley with clarity and see the path that God had traced for us. We can't see his
faithfulness through it all.
And we can't see it in that season. We cannot see it by nature, by definition. It is dark. It is foggy. It is hard to see. There is no clarity, but there is a perspective. There is a vantage point that you will have someday. That's right. In faith, if you keep walking and trusting, where you can look back over that season and be able to say, look what God did, and then share that with the world so that other people who are going through that brokenness can hear from you. I know you don't understand, but you're going to get through it and it's going to be okay.
That's so good. That's so good. I often say that while you're walking through the valley, it looks dark and ominous, like you'll never get out of it. Once you get up out of the valley and onto that mountaintop, you look back over the valley, it's always a beautiful view. It's always beautiful.
That's really good.
that's the case for your story. And of course, your story is continually being written. There's still more, right? You've not reached an arrival point, just like none of us have reached an arrival point, right? But we're walking this thing out. We're continuing to press into the Lord, pressing into good, strong community, into each other. And so thanks for being an example of that, guys. Thank you for sharing vulnerably from your hearts and your own story. And I know this is blessing so many people as they listen to it. So where can we follow you guys? Where can we tune in more to what you guys are doing?
We're on all the socials. You can just out of the dust music anywhere, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the places. And our website, outofthedustmusic.com. I'd say we're probably the most active on Instagram. That's where a lot of we're really grateful for our community there and the conversations that we get to have through messages over there. But yeah, please don't hesitate.
And depending on when this comes out too, you can see us on tour. We're headed out this summer, all across the country in churches and
you guys coming through Indy at all?
House shows.
We have
she's
what?
She's the planner.
Have. We'll be at a church actually in September in Marion, Indiana.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Not too far from us. We'll have to reach out and
South Bend. That's Indiana.
South
right?
Bend's a little further away.
South Bend, right on the border.
A little bit further away. But yeah, that's great.
Find us anyway. We'd love to connect.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thanks, guys, so much for spending time with us. Just a wonderful story and wonderful time with you.
Love it.
Yeah, thanks.
Really
for having
blessed.
us.
Yeah.
Hey, friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.